They had been watching him for days before they finally decided to strike. To the raiding party, it was hardly a matter of risk. The target was a lone human, isolated on a frontier outpost, separated from the dense clusters of his kind that made up the more dangerous colonies. He moved with calm purpose, tending to structures and mechanisms the aliens didn't care to understand. To them, it was simple. One human, alone, no defenses. Easy prey. The raiders were known across the sector for their efficiency. They had broken worlds, enslaved dozens of species, and taken trophies that now decorated the warship that carried them. The human was supposed to be just another in a long list of conquests, no different than the fragile insectoids or the timid avians who had already bowed to their will. But even in the hours before the ambush, something about this one unsettled them. They would never admit it aloud, of course. Warriors of their caste prided themselves on fearlessness. Still, when they spoke in hushed tones, they admitted to feeling watched as though the man knew they were coming. When the ambush began, it was almost insultingly simple. He was cornered, his tools stripped away, his dwelling surrounded. Pulse rifles locked on his chest, restraints snapped over his wrists, and he was dragged aboard the ship with no resistance. Not a word, not a cry, not even a gesture of struggle. The raiders laughed at their luck. Capturing such a prize so easily was a victory worth boasting about. But in the silence that followed, doubt began to creep in. For the humans said nothing. Most captives screamed, cursed, pleaded, or at least demanded to know what was happening. That was part of the entertainment. The begging, the futile rage, the realization of hopelessness. But this one simply stared. His eyes roamed the halls of the warship as if he were memorizing every bolt, every seam, every shadow. His breathing never quickened. His pulse, as measured by scanners, remained disturbingly steady. It was as if the raid had changed nothing in him. He was already preparing, already calculating. At first, the guards mocked him. They shoved him, jeered at his silence, and even tried to provoke him into breaking that maddening composure. Nothing worked. The human simply endured, his gaze cool, his jaw clenched in a way that seemed less fearful than patient. One of the younger warriors suggested the human was broken inside, that he had surrendered to despair. That comforted them for a short while. Yet unease returned each time they passed his cell and saw the same piercing calm in his eyes. The ship's commander ordered an initial scan. They needed to know if this specimen was any different from the others they had taken in the past, but the results were frustrating. Physically, he matched the known parameters. Bipedal, oxygen-breathing mammal, musculature above average but not remarkable, no visible augmentations or implants. His biology should have been simple, and yet the machines faltered. His vitals fluctuated in ways the scanners couldn't predict. His brain activity surged when it should have weakened, and dropped when it should have spiked. When subjected to invasive probes, his nervous system reacted not with shock but with something disturbingly close to adaptation. The medical staff recommended caution. The warriors scoffed at such hesitation. But still, none of them volunteered to enter the cell alone. Hours turned into days. The human remained silent, refusing to speak even when offered food or threatened with pain. He ate when they left meals, drank when water was provided, but gave them nothing of himself. And in that refusal, power shifted. They could no longer tell if he was the prisoner or if they were the ones under observation. Rumors spread through the lower decks. Some claimed the human never blinked. Others swore he moved when no one was watching, testing the restraints, flexing his muscles until the metal creaked. One guard insisted he had seen the man smile to himself when the lights dimmed. The story spread like contagion, and soon even the seasoned warriors avoided passing his cell unless absolutely necessary. When the commander heard of this, he ordered a direct confrontation. He entered the holding chamber with half a dozen guards, towering over the captive, and demanded to know his name, his origin, and his purpose on the frontier world. The human only looked at him. Minutes passed in silence and the commander's fury rose. He struck the human across the face. The sound echoed against the metal walls. The captive's head turned from the force of the blow, but when he faced forward again, there was no pain in his eyes, no submission, only that same unflinching stare. The commander left in frustration, but those who were in the chamber that day carried the memory of that gaze with them, and it followed them into their sleep. The first signs of true danger came subtly. Restraints that should have been unbreakable began to show hairline fractures. Guards reported strange disturbances in the surveillance feeds, flickers, shadows, moments when the human wasn't where he should have been. At first they blamed faulty equipment, but replacements showed the same anomalies. The man was moving in ways they couldn't quite track, adjusting himself in the moments between frames. A senior guard decided to test the theory. He entered the cell with two others, weapons trained on the captive. As the others watched through monitors, the senior guard tried to provoke him again. He shouted, threatened, even fired a pulse round into the wall inches from the man's head. Still no reaction, only silence. The guard leaned closer, certain he had proven the human's weakness. That was when the restraint snapped. It wasn't a full escape, only a shift of the wrist that bent steel like softened clay. But the sound of it silenced the chamber. The guards froze. The human could have lashed out then, could have killed at least one of them before the others reacted. But he didn't. He simply let them see what he was capable of, then folded his hands again, as if to say, "I allow this imprisonment only because I choose to." The guards retreated in shaken silence. Word spread faster than the commander could suppress it. Soon the entire crew knew. Their prize wasn't a trophy. It was a predator in chains. Sleep grew harder to find aboard the warship. The crew whispered about the captive in every corridor, inventing theories about what he might do next. Some wanted to eject him into space and be done with it. Others insisted that would only invite vengeance from his kind. A few dared to think of selling him to the highest bidder, but even they spoke in trembling voices, as though merely suggesting it was enough to bring his wrath. Still the human said nothing. The silence was no longer passive. It was active resistance, a weapon sharper than any blade. Every hour he remained unmoved, the crew's confidence decayed. They began to imagine that he could hear their thoughts, that he could feel their fear, that he was waiting for the perfect moment to break free. They locked his cell with triple barriers, but somehow that only made them feel less safe, not more. For if he truly wanted to escape, what wall could hold him? The commander doubled the guard rotations. He stationed warriors outside the holding chamber day and night. Yet every time those guards returned, their reports grew stranger. They spoke of dreams filled with the human's face, of waking to find bruises on their wrists as though he had touched them in their sleep. One swore he heard the man's breathing echoing down the hall when the cell was sealed. Another claimed he heard footsteps behind him, only to find the corridors empty. Fear was no longer a whisper. It was a presence growing heavier with every passing day. And still, the human waited. The decision was made to interrogate him. Silence had become unbearable, more corrosive to morale than open defiance would have been. They gathered their most experienced inquisitors, beings who had broken prisoners of war, spies, traitors, and even members of their own kind. They were confident. Their methods were refined, their technology precise. No creature had ever resisted them for long. The human was brought into the chamber, bound in energy restraints, suspended under the blinding light of alien machinery. They expected him to crack the moment the first probe entered his mind. But when the process began, something unexpected occurred. Instead of cries, they heard silence. Instead of disorientation, they saw his eyes sharpen with frightening clarity. The interrogators increased the intensity. Neural pulses that had shattered others like glass rippled through him, and yet he endured, gaze fixed upon the lead inquisitor as though he were the one under observation. The alien technicians recalibrated, baffled by readings that refused to align with biological norms. Human brain activity spiked when it should have collapsed, dropping when it should have surged. What should have been unbearable agony registered as something else entirely. An adaptation, a shifting of pathways, as though his mind was learning from the attack, not breaking under it. The lead inquisitor withdrew, shaken in a way he had never known. The human smiled faintly. Word spread across the ship, not by command, not by official report, but by whispers carried from those who had witnessed it. They said the human absorbed pain and turned it into strength. They said he learned from suffering in ways no other species could. Soon, the whispers turned to fear. Some claimed the human was deliberately allowing them to test him, using their cruelty as training for what would come later. The commanders refused to relent. Experiments followed. They exposed him to toxins, only to discover his body neutralized them faster than any chart predicted. They denied him food for days, expecting collapse, only to see him grow leaner but sharper, his movements precise and controlled. They subjected him to simulated void exposure. His heart slowed but never stopped, his eyes watching them through the frost with terrifying calm. Every method they deployed ended in failure. Among the crew, discipline began to fracture. Warriors who had once mocked him now walked corridors with unease, avoiding his cell when possible. The human's reputation became heavier than his presence. Some whispered that they had captured not a soldier, but a weapon disguised as a man. Tension turned inward. A faction among the crew urged immediate termination. Kill him, jettison his body, erase this mistake before it grew worse. But others resisted. They argued that his resilience made him priceless. Imagine the prophet, they said, if they could sell him to rival empires, or dissect him for secrets that could turn the tide of wars. To throw him away would be wasteful. The debate grew heated, splitting loyalty aboard the vessel. In the mess halls, warriors stared at each other with suspicion. Officers whispered behind closed doors, calculating which path would lead to survival. And all the while, the human waited, silent, patient, as if aware of the divisions his existence created. It was in the dim hours of artificial night that fear reached a new height. A guard patrolling near the human cell swore he heard a voice. Not the human's, but his own, whispering doubts he had tried to bury. He claimed the man had spoken them aloud before he even thought them. Others laughed, but unease spread. Another guard claimed the captive appeared in his dreams, walking calmly through endless corridors, watching without speaking. The dreams grew more common, and those who suffered them began to lose sleep. The ship grew restless, drained, fragile. The commander doubled down. They attempted a grand demonstration of power, forcing the human into combat simulations where he was pitted against holographic monsters designed to terrify. He dismantled them without hesitation, his strikes efficient, his movements eerily calculated. The technicians increased difficulty, flooding the chamber with overwhelming odds. He fought like a predator among prey, adapting faster than the algorithms could adjust. Eventually, they shut the simulation down, not because he had lost, but because the observers could no longer bear to watch. From that day, the crew began to call him something different in private tongue, an old word meaning unbroken. Whispers leaked beyond the ship. Messages, encrypted but intercepted, carried tales of a human who would not bend. Other vessels caught fragments of the story and passed them along. Rumors spread faster than official denial could catch them. Soon distant systems murmured of the captive who had survived what no one else could. Some said he was invulnerable. Others said he was cursed. The ship became divided not just by debate, but by fear. Officers who once commanded obedience now struggled to keep order. Fights broke out among crew. Blood was spilled not for plunder, but over what to do about the man locked in their cells. And through it all, the human remained silent, his composure unbroken, as if feeding on their disarray. When systems began to fail, many blamed sabotage. Lights flickered, doors jammed, sensors gave false readings. The engineers tore the ship apart searching for faults, but nothing explained it. Some whispered that the human had learned to bend machines to his will, that his silence carried weight that warped reality around him. Logic said otherwise, but fear has no need of logic. The climax of unrest came when a group of warriors tried to kill him in secret. They entered the cell with weapons ready, determined to end what their leaders could not. Moments later, alarms rang across the ship. The cell's locks were destroyed, the warriors found unconscious, their weapons shattered, their bodies marked with wounds too precise to be random. The human sat calmly against the wall, restraints intact once again, watching as though nothing had happened. No recording captured how he had done it. Only silence remained. The commander raged, threatening executions for cowardice and failure, but his words rang hollow. The crew no longer believed in his authority. They believed in the human. They believed he was waiting for something and that when the moment came, nothing would save them. And still he said nothing. The silence ended not with words but with action. Systems across the vessel began to fail one by one, not in catastrophic bursts, but in careful, deliberate collapses that pointed to intent. Navigation recalibrated without command. Power grids redirected in loops that drained reserves faster than they could replenish. Weapons locked themselves into standby, as if awaiting permission from a different master. At first the engineers thought it was sabotage from within, but soon the pattern was undeniable. Someone was learning their systems from the inside out, understanding them at a level no outsider should have. The human was still in his cell, restraints intact, yet the suspicion fell to him instantly. Guards checked and rechecked his confinement, finding nothing out of place. He remained still, calm, always watching. But the more the ship trembled, the more the crew believed he was orchestrating it. Some claimed they saw him shift his eyes in rhythm with the failing lights, as though his gaze itself bent circuitry. Others swore they felt their thoughts pulled apart when standing too near him, like strands in a web slowly unraveling. Logic failed them, leaving fear as the only language they understood. When the engines failed altogether, panic spread. The ship drifted, vulnerable in open space. Other raiding bands were near enough to see the fall of their mighty flagship. Messages went out for assistance, but the replies were filled with hesitation. No one wanted to come close. Word of the human had spread too far. They had become cursed by association. The commander, desperate to salvage authority, confronted the captive directly. He stood before the man with weapon drawn, demanding to know how he was doing it. But as always, silence answered him. The only sound was the slow rhythm of the human's breath, calm even as fury burned in the commander's voice. When he pressed the weapon against the man's head, there was no fear, no plea, not even a blink. Only the faintest tightening of the jaw, a reminder that defiance could exist without words. The commander hesitated. That hesitation sealed his fate. It began with small escapes, restraints that broke as though weakened from within, locks that disengaged when no code had been entered, cameras that recorded only static in the moments when he moved. The first time he left his cell, no one saw him until he was already standing in the command deck, silent, unarmed, but present in a place he could not possibly have reached. Panic erupted. Weapons fired, alarms shrieked, but he vanished into shadow before a single shot connected. The commander tried to assure the crew it was impossible, but the proof was in their own terror-filled eyes. From that moment he stopped being a prisoner. He became a presence, a hunter stalking the corridors. Guards would disappear during patrols, their weapons left behind in pieces, their bodies never found. Storage compartments opened to reveal symbols scratched into walls, marks no one recognized, but which filled every onlooker with dread. The crew grew hollow-eyed, sleep-deprived, jumping at every sound. He had become everywhere and nowhere at once. Then came the first open strike. A squadron of warriors gathered in the armory, planning mutiny against the commander. The lights flickered, and when they returned, the human stood among them, holding nothing but the broken chain of his former restraint. No words passed his lips. The warriors charged anyway, but the fight was over in breaths. He moved like a predator unleashed, striking with precision, breaking bones with each swing, turning their numbers into clutter that only slowed them. When the last fell, he stood unscathed, blood dripping from his hands, eyes calm as ever. He left the bodies behind and walked into the shadows once more. From that day forward, the crew stopped asking whether they should kill him. They began to beg their commanders to let them abandon ship, to flee into escape pods and scatter to the stars. But the commander, too bound by pride and fear of humiliation, refused. He insisted the human could still be subdued. Yet each order rang weaker than the last, and each refusal to abandon ship only deepened the belief that they were all doomed. The turning point arrived when the human took the command deck itself. The crew found him seated in the captain's chair, the commander's body at his feet, lifeless, his weapon bent into useless scrap. The human touched no controls, yet systems across the vessel answered to his presence, screens shifting displays to align with his gaze. The crew froze, waiting for words that never came. He looked at each of them in turn, and in that gaze they saw everything they had feared since the moment of capture: intelligence, patience, judgment, and above all, a warning. Then, without a word, he walked out, leaving the bridge behind, as though daring them to follow. None did. The message came soon after. Across the ship's communication systems, across frequencies the crew hadn't even known existed, his voice finally spoke for the first and only time. It was calm, steady, devoid of rage, but weighted with certainty. He said only, "Never again." Those words carried into every system, rebroadcast across channels they could not block. Within hours, fleets across the sector heard it. Within days, empires spoke of it. Never again would they try to take a human alive. The ship was found drifting weeks later, every system dead, every corridor silent. Of the crew, few remained, scattered in escape pods, broken in mind if not in body. Their stories contradicted each other in detail, but all shared the same truth. The human had walked among them like inevitability, unstoppable, unbreakable. They had tried to capture him, but in doing so they had captured their own doom. And from that day, across the stars, the legend spread. Whispers in every port spoke of the one they should never have taken. Children of alien worlds grew up fearing the silent figure who could not be broken. Commanders rewrote their manuals with a single directive: engage humans with caution, and never, under any circumstance, try to claim them as prisoners. The human returned to his people eventually. How, no one could explain. No ship traced his path, no signal marked his journey. He simply appeared, whole, scarred, but unbowed. And when asked what had happened, he gave the same silence he had given his captors. Only his eyes told the truth, that he had seen the depths of their fear, and had left them alive only as a warning to the rest. Across the galaxy, warlords who once mocked humanity began to tread lightly. Empires recalculated their strategies. And in the shadows, whispers grew into belief that humans were no the words echoed across the stars long after the ship was found drifting. Never again. Two syllables spoken once, yet repeated endlessly as though the galaxy itself could not silence them. Across trading hubs and military outposts, from lawless frontier stations to the gilded halls of empires, the story spread. Some dismissed it as myth, others dissected it as propaganda, but none could deny the weight of fear those words carried. For the first time in memory, warlords who had raided freely hesitated when scanning human colonies. Captains who once sought the profit of human captives suddenly altered course, preferring easier prey. There were whispers that the one who had spoken was not just a man, but a weapon, perhaps even the first of many. Fear, once dismissed as weakness, became armor around humanity. Among the strongest empires, debate raged. The Vedra's consortium demanded immediate retaliation, arguing that to let fear grow would be to cede power. They demanded fleets be dispatched to seize human worlds, to break their people before legend hardened into reality. But others hesitated. The Kelm Dominion had already interrogated survivors from the drifting warship, warriors who now sat in asylums muttering about shadows in the corridors, about eyes that pierced through steel, about silence that felt like judgment. They insisted no fleet could stand against such an enemy. Yet empires do not survive on fear alone. In secret halls, rulers plotted, driven not by courage but by calculation. They could not let humans become untouchable. Resources were poured into research, searching ancient archives for forgotten accounts of humanity. They uncovered old reports buried in dust, stories of soldiers who fought until their last breath, of colonists who survived on barren rocks by sheer will, of explorers who crossed voids without aid. Each account seemed too extreme, too improbable, yet when compared to the present, the pattern was undeniable. Humans endured. Humans adapted. Humans defied odds that should have broken them. The legend of the unbroken captive gave weight to every old tale. Where once they were curiosities, now they became warnings. On the outer rim, pirate fleets disbanded rather than risk human retaliation. In neutral markets, human traders found themselves avoided, not out of disdain, but fear. Deals were offered quickly, prices lowered, negotiations rushed. Even the boldest merchants admitted unease when meeting the calm gaze of a human across the table. Still, there were those who believed the fear was exaggerated. Among them was the Torth Ascendancy, an empire of arrogance and cold logic. They believed in data, not rumor, and data said humans were primitive compared to their technology. To them, the drifting warship was not proof of human strength, but of alien incompetence. They launched their own operation, sending a fleet not to capture but to observe. They shadowed human vessels, monitoring without engagement. They studied patterns, communications, behavior. Yet the longer they watched, the more uncomfortable they became. Human ships were unpredictable. One freighter might follow known routes faithfully for weeks, only to suddenly divert into uncharted space and vanish without explanation. Colonists built settlements where survival was mathematically impossible, yet returned generations later thriving. Their soldiers fought with strategies that defied models, often choosing the least efficient tactic, only for it to prove devastatingly effective. It was as though humans thrived on chaos itself. Reports piled up, analysts grew restless, and eventually the Torth made their own mistake.